Hello, welcome. It's John Florescu here in Bucharest, Romania. And today's guest is Ambassador Adrian Zuckerman. And I'd like to ask, can we call you Adrian for this conversation?
If I can call you John, you can call me Adrian.
Okay, that's good. And we're both in Bucharest, which makes it easy. And just an introductory word about Adrian. He was born in Bucharest and left at the age of 9, I believe, with his parents to the United States. He came, I think, initially to Connecticut, or in any event, I know he went to school there at a school called Hampton Hall Day School, which is in Connecticut, and I discovered is the 4th day school in the United States, fourth one built, which I think is some distinction there. And then obviously he did well because he went on to MIT, and everybody in New England wants to go to MIT or Harvard or Yale. And after then, he distinguished himself with a JD at New York Law School. If I'm not over summarizing, his career has mostly been in real estate, both nationwide as well as New York City, where I think he lived most of his adult life. Former President Donald Trump appointed him ambassador to Romania in December of 2019, and a job he held right up until the January 20th of this year. And prior to that, the United States was represented by Hans Clem, who retired from the State Department and now is doing various, very active, I see, from what he's been saying, involved with Fulbright and other things. Well, one obvious question starts right from the top is, what do you think of the Bucharest real estate market?
That's a good question, but 2 corrections to your opening statement. It was Hampton Hall Country Day School.
Oh, okay.
And I was actually nominated by President Trump prior to that, and I was confirmed in November, but I arrived at post in the middle of December, I think December 14th of 19. Minor dates, but that's okay. The Bucharest real estate market seems to be thriving.
It's a good place.
There's a lot of
good place.
Go ahead, John.
No, go ahead. I interrupted you. It's thriving away, you said.
No, the market is thriving. There's a lot of new construction. Bucharest is a dynamic city, and I think it's going to continue to be a dynamic city. And I think it's going to be a much more significant European capital over the coming years.
I think so. And certainly it's coming out of its COVID cocoon, which we were talking about earlier before we started on. When was the last time you came to Romania before you came as ambassador, Adrian?
I was here some 10, 12 years ago. I think probably closer to 12 with my daughter. It was the first time I had been back, and it was a real experience for me to see how much things have changed since I was 9 years old. So it was quite a bit of a difference. We spent a wonderful couple of weeks here then.
And it must have been, you haven't been born in Romania, and I think that's the first, no? The way we have a Romanian-born ambassador coming to the homeland. That must have felt quite unique, special. You talked about it in your confirmation hearings.
It was a great experience for me. I think it was a very warm and thrilling experience for me. The warmth that the Romanian people showed me, they could not have been more welcoming, more friendly, more hospitable, and it really made me feel at home. And I can't thank all of them enough. I think the Romanian people have been great, from ordinary people, not that there is something like an ordinary person. I think everybody's wonderful and terrific, but to President Iohannis and then Prime Minister Orban and other members of government, everybody could not have been more friendly and more welcoming towards me.
Well, I think it's something totally special. And, you certainly, there's all kinds of stories, funny stories about your good luck in getting the ambassadorship. I don't know if it's a well-known story, but is anything that you'd like to shed on that? Because it was all kinds of people told me all kinds of stories. So I don't know what the truth is.
Oh, I don't know what the truth is, but we got through it, and I am very honored and thankful to President Trump for having faith and confidence in me to send me to Romania as his representative and the representative of the American people. And I did my best to advance our bilateral relationship, and I think we made progress in a number of areas. And it was a wonderful and unique experience, and I will always be thankful, not just to President Trump and the American people for that, but also the Romanian people and the Romanian government people for making a lot of that possible and making it just a tremendously gratifying experience.
Well, you certainly worked your magic quickly, because I think President Iohannis was one of the first foreign leaders to come to the White House. Is that right?
I believe he was the first, and I believe he was the only one to come to the White House twice. So I know he has an excellent relationship with President Trump, and I can, knowing President Iohannis, I understand why. He's done a tremendous job here, and I think he has a terrific relationship with the United States, and I think Romania as a whole has a tremendous relationship with the United States. And I have often said to an extensive amount that Romania has no better friend than the United States, and I believe that to be so.
I think that's true. And it's funny you should say that, because one of my questions was, do you think that Romania is America's closest ally in Central America? You've answered Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe, and certainly I think that is the case. And it's quite remarkable. Were you at the meeting with the President Trump and President Iohannis?
When President Iohannis came to the United States?
Thank the United States.
No, that was shortly before I was confirmed, and I did not feel it was appropriate for me to attend that prior to my confirmation.
Well, you would think that in a way, because President Trump had two wives from, Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, that he had a feel for the place. And I don't think he's ever been to Romania, as far as I know. But certainly, he must know the world through his former wives or his current wife as well. And obviously, it's remarkable to me that President Iohannis came twice, and I think that's just underscores the point you just made right now. I want to ask you, because in the
let me just make one comment. I think I know President Trump's current wife, Melania, who's a wonderful, wonderful person. But I think President Trump had a very good understanding, not just of Romania, but of Europe and all of the countries in Europe, as well as other countries and areas around the world. So I would not just limit him to having a good understanding of Romania or other countries by virtue of some familial relationship.
Right. Well, good point. I think that's a very fair point. The closeness of that relationship between the United States and Romania, I always thought, I always understood, and I always wondered whether it was difficult for President Trump to maintain that closeness, given the fact that, at least in the media, he was portrayed as being accommodating to Mr. Putin. In other words, that they were relatively, close, not close, but at least it seemed like he avoided criticizing Mr. Putin. And yet, on the other hand, he had taken measures, sanctions against Russia repeatedly in the course of the time. Was it ever difficult to sort of bridge that, what seems almost like a incompatibility there, or an obstacle?
Well, I'm not the expert on U.S. relations
Yeah.
with Russia, but I will say that I think President Trump is very cognizant of those relationships. And I think there were more sanctions and more uh, uh, tough positions taken by President Trump with Russia as well as with other countries, so that it was never quite clear to me why some people had that understanding with regard to Putin. But I'm not sure I'm the expert on U.S.-Russia relations to address those issues.
Right.
I'm a little further south than the Russian border here, and but in terms of U.S. positions with regard to Russia, I don't think anybody has taken a tougher positions or clearer positions or more deliberate forward-looking positions consistent with overall American policy than President Trump did. So I'm not quite sure I agree with your statement, but be that as it may.
Okay. When I was talking to former Ambassador Joanna, now Deputy NATO Director Mircea Joanna a little while ago, he made the observation, having been ambassador in Washington, that he thought too much that the relationship between the United States and Romania was built too much on a visit to the White House or a visit to the Senate or the Washington prayer breakfast. You know, there's sort of big things. And he said he thought it'd be more useful if American-Romanian relations had a wider plank in a way, you know, cultural, educational, business-wise, and so forth. I mean, by the old standards, you know, the Trump Johannes relationship was fantastic, twice to the White House. By the old standards of measuring these things, that was a big success. But do you share that view that the wider bridge has been kind of overlooked a little bit?
Well, I'm not sure what Mircea Joanna, I've met him on several occasions.
Yeah.
He's never articulated the view that you've set forth to me, and I'm not quite sure that's really his view or not. I don't know, but if it is,
Yeah.
I think it does not give credit to a lot of the tremendous things that have happened over the last year as a result of President Johannes's visit to the White House. There was tremendous development, broad-based, in a variety of areas, including military modernization, economic development, religious freedom, rule of law. A tremendous amount of issues were addressed, areas were developed. So I think to say something like that does not give credit to all of the very positive results that were spawned by President Johannes and President Trump.
Yeah, I would just say, Adrian, to give it a balance, he wasn't referring so much to the Trump period. He was just saying, generally speaking, including during his own presidency going back 20 years, you know, not just, he wasn't really referring to Trump per se. He was just saying over the years, our objective here in Washington as a Romanian ambassador was to always get them into Washington. But anyways, when you took your confirmation hearings, or attended those, you spoke about the top priority is to fight corruption, and that's always a difficult one. It's always one that gets passed along from one, you know, ambassador to another, and I think all the ambassadors deal with it in their own way. What do you say now that you've had the experience here? What grade would you give the Romanian government in dealing with the fight for corruption? Let's say not just in your own immediate experience, but a bit before.
Well, a bit before, I'm not quite sure how we can accurately grade somebody a bit before, and I'm not sure that's really fair. I'm not really looking to
Well,
be critical of prior people. And as I've told many, we deal with a lot of the issues, as I know Hans did, and I know Mark Gittenstein, who was here prior to that. There are a lot of issues that are on the table that are important to address rather than being critical of individuals. And I think that the government last year, which I'm most familiar with, did a yeoman's job in terms of advancing the rule of law, even though they did not control the parliament. Notwithstanding that, we put in effect, we helped the government, the justice minister, the interior minister here, put in effect a zero tolerance policy with regard to human trafficking, organized crime, drugs, things of that nature.
Right.
There need to be some legislative reforms, which my understanding is are in the works as we speak, and hopefully they'll come to fruition quickly. But I think the prior government and the current government are working very, very diligently with regard to the rule of law and addressing all of these issues. And as I've said many, many times, a lot of the corruption emanates from the remnants of the former communist government, which has destroyed generations and is the biggest plague this country has ever had. So I think President Iohannis has made the statement that he wants to see a normal Romania. Prime Minister Orban, when he was prime minister, said the same thing. And I think current Prime Minister Kitsu is focusing on that as well. And those are the issues. And I think both the government last year and the current government now is focusing on that and moving forward with great diligence. So I think a tremendous amount of progress was made over the last 14 months or so.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, that's good to hear, and that's positive news, as you say. While you were telling me about your discussions there, did you speak Romanian, tend to speak Romanian with your counterparts, or in English?
Well, you know, when you leave a country when you're 9 years old, your vocabulary tends to have some limitations to it.
Right.
So we tried to speak Romanian. They were kind to me, and I must say that all the members of the government, or most of them, speak very good English, and especially President Iohannis, who speaks excellent English. So let's just say we spoke a mix.
Right, right. Well, that probably comes in handy. And I would think that actually the fact you were born in Romania maybe would make it easier because you're one of us in a way. And to try to kind of bridge those things, I think it makes it much more, you know, they know you connect to the society, even if it was 9 years old, but maybe through your parents more. And I think that's a real plus. And I think it's fantastic they have one born here. But, you know, culturally, the countries are still very different. And certainly the agendas in the United States and the traditional world here, I always thought, I remember a neighbor of mine said that he didn't like his US company forcing their employees to participate in, let's say, gay rights parades or things like that, because, you know, you have a traditional Orthodox society that isn't moving in the same rhythm as what you see in the United States. And was it ever difficult to push certain, you know, I'd say, you know, priorities, I would say, in a society that was still different, thought differently?
Well, I think it's very important that every individual's rights are respected, and every individual is treated with decency and respect. I am surprised to hear that somebody said that to you. I have never had that experience here, and nobody has ever articulated that to me. I don't think any sort of discrimination against any individual is tolerable, and I think that that was one of the issues and the priorities, starting with religious freedom to respect for every human being. We're all God's children, and we should all be treated with decency and respect. And I have never seen what you've described, and I'm sorry you've seen that. It's just not acceptable.
Yeah. To switching over to trade and business, obviously, the United States seems to be under Donald Trump and under President Biden locked in a head-on continuing struggle with China. And I see here in Romania that Chinese business has, taken a step up from where it was before. You look at Highway, the telephones that you see all across the country. Are you concerned, or were you concerned when you were here that the Chinese were stepping up their game in this market? Did you see evidence of that? Did it concern you? Was it on the agenda?
Well, Chinese influence around the world and increasing Chinese influence is a concern. And I think in any discussion, we have to articulate why it's a concern. It's not because it's Chinese, it's because every company in China, or virtually every company, especially the more substantial ones, report back to the communist Chinese government. It's a source of espionage. It's a source of basically organized theft of intellectual property and trade secrets. I've seen it in Romania, where there were Chinese companies bidding on tenders against American companies whose technology and intellectual property they had stolen, being sued around the world, and they were bidding on the same contract here using American technology to try to be competitive and undercutting not just the American companies whose technologies they had stolen, but other companies, because there are other companies in Romania, not just American companies. There are companies from all over the world here. Right. So that's why we have to be careful. The Chinese companies were brought here some 20 odd years ago, and they were here during communist times. And again, it's an unfortunate remnant of Romania's communist past. I hope it will be limited. We were fortunate enough to be able to have China's agreements to rebuild the nuclear electrical plant at Chernobyl terminated, and have the project led by an American company, a consortium that's going to be led by an American company. We've tried to advance legislation that would protect national security, as it has in other countries in Europe, in Poland, in Romania. It's pending. Hopefully it'll be passed soon. but in other countries in Europe and around the world, which if you have companies like Huawei, for example, it impairs national securities by virtue of being able to tap into all communications and other information processing computers. So it's a problem, and it's a problem in other technologies and other areas as well, not just in Romania, but unfortunately all over the world.
Right. And
Yeah.
speaking about the region here, one issue that came up, I think it was maybe during your time, maybe a bit before, had to do with Turkey's acquisitions of air defense systems from Russia. I think it was called the S-400. And they were putting them here in Turkey when Turkey is, you know, supposedly close to NATO and one of our soldiers. Did that issue come up, and how do you see that situation?
I think that security issue created a problem, not just for the United States, but
Yeah.
for Europe.
Yeah.
I think it was being addressed at a political level between the United States and Turkey, as well as other European countries and Turkey. And hopefully it will be resolved in such a fashion so that Turkey continues to be the stalwart NATO ally that it has been, and we can transcend this episode, which is obviously problematic, but I am hopeful that it will be resolved in a positive fashion.
I see. When you were on your confirmation hearings, you said you spoke about the perils, quote, the perils of an aggressive Russia seeking to destabilize democracy in Europe from within and without are substantial and it cannot be underestimated, which I think was a very correct comment. And you certainly have been vindicated ever since you made those comments. And recently in the United States, I know that there are all kinds of places that were hacked, whether federal government agencies or businesses, private businesses. What's your view on that? Where do we stand on that? Do you think is it as strong in your mind an issue as it was when you declared it so, or we're on top of it?
Well, I'm not sure what being on top of it really means, but I think the Russian efforts to destabilize and create disinformation and spawn disinformation, not just in Romania, but in other Eastern European countries, and for that matter, in a lot of countries around the world, is at a substantially high level. It's hard for me to say, is it the highest ever, is it a little lower, is it a little higher? I don't know, but it's at a very substantial and high level. I think they're acting directly and through a variety of intermediaries. I think they're looking to acquire a variety of interests through various economic means and intermediaries. I think they act the same way in the press through a variety of intermediaries. Yeah. And it's a problem. It creates destabilization, it creates fake news, it creates lack of faith in government institutions and religious institutions and societal institutions as a whole. And it's intended to create mayhem and destabilize countries.
Yeah, I know that Romania, of course, is very gifted in the field of cybersecurity. They have companies in that area. They even have this famous guy called Guccifer. I don't know if they made a movie out of the guy. he is a Romanian. Did we ever turn to the Romanians and say, hey, can you give us some help with some of these cyber wonks from Timișoara or Bucharest or Iași, wherever they are? Did we ever?
I can't comment on that. It's not in my lane, and even if I know about it, I wouldn't comment on that. But let me just say that the Romanian information technology area and Romanian IT, their businesses are booming. Cities like Cluj, Timișoara, Iași are and Bucharest, for that matter, are destination points for people from all over Europe and other countries to come to work in the technology sector. It is flourishing. It is probably one of the best in Europe. It's world caliber. You have places like Amazon that are in Bucharest and Iași, companies like Amazon that are in Bucharest and Iași. You have other, Microsoft is here. You have a tremendous amount of Romanian talent and people from overseas that work in that sector. So Romania is a leader in the technology area and will continue to be so, which will support what I see as Romania becoming a leader in Europe in the years to come. Not just in that sector, but energy as well, and in other sectors as well.
I see. I share your view on that. To switch over now that you're in Romania and I'm in Romania and we have COVID all over the world, and what we see now is the United States, starting to catch up, 13 million shots a day, and Romania's, like most of Europe, is a little bit behind in terms of getting the vaccine out. What's your thought? Is how quickly do you think this vaccination program, as it comes forward in Romania, as it has now in the United States, will jumpstart the Romanian economy? Do you think you see a turnaround at any particular point from your discussions and your observations or what you've seen in the United States, or is it too early to say?
Well, I think the vaccine, not just for Romania, but for the United States, for Europe, for a lot of the other industrial countries, I don't think any of the economies are going to jumpstart, as you put it, but I think there's going to be a slow, positive progression to recover lost ground, to try to get back to normal, not just on the manufacturing side, but the financial side, and move forward. One of the big consequences that I've seen, and perhaps I've just been more sensitive to it by my background in real estate, is sort of our changed work habits with teleworking, where that is going to end up in 6 months or a year or 2 years. Is it really going to change dramatically the need for office space? Will a company need to have the same amount of office space, less, more? Remains to be seen. I don't know. Clearly, the trend now is for many, many people to telework as not just a safety measure, but also some find it more convenient, some find it more efficient. I'm not sure how that will play out in the long term, but I see some changes in that respect, which mostly affects the service sector, maybe some of the financial sectors, but we'll see how that works.
Well, you're being a seasoned New York real estate I just point out about 2 weeks ago, I was buying a hot dog on Avenue of the Americas, and the guy serves me a hot dog. I said, how many hot dogs have you sold today? He said, you're number 15. And I said, well, in a normal time, how many do you sell? And I looked at my watch at 4:30. He says about 600. And so he says, the buildings are mostly empty. And I heard that the head of Goldman Sachs now wants everybody back in the office and so forth. sitting here in Bucharest, do you have any feel on which way this is going? Do you think people are going to move back to the offices, or it's just too early to say?
Well, you know, you're from Boston. I'm not sure you're a real New Yorker, because if you're a real New Yorker, you have to get some mustard and sauerkraut on the dirty water dog, and then cross the street in one hand and cross it against the light. So if you didn't do that, I'm not sure how that went. But I don't know. That's going to be a problem. I think a lot of people don't want to come back. I think they like the flexibility in terms of hours. They like the flexibility of being at home, more family time. I don't know. It's one of the issues, sort of the unintended consequences of dealing with these types of situations.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to do for the real estate market. Obviously, it's been bad, from my understanding. Real estate prices in New York, from purchase prices, leasing prices, are down anywhere from 25 to 40%, depending on where you look. There's a lot of vacancies. A lot of restaurants have been closed. What's going to happen in a month, 2 months, 6 months, as restaurants open, as people come back to work? Maybe not 100%, maybe less, remains to be seen. I think places like New York, which are great cultural centers, great social centers, may be impacted differently than large cities, which don't have the same cultural and social attractions that a place like New York, that has the museums, Broadway, a variety of other attractions, has. So it's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue for Bucharest. It's going to be an issue for all cities.
Yeah. I was looking at the statistics from the Commerce Department on trade between the United States and Romania going back a few years. Today, I was looking at those statistics, and I was surprised to see that it's sort of leveling off, and the United States is no longer in the top 10 among countries trading into Romania. You spoke about the huge success on the side of IT and all those fantastic cities and all that's going on in the United States with UiPath and all these companies and so on. But what's happened elsewhere? Has there been a slowdown? Are there certain sectors? I mean, I was looking at the sectors here that were still moving quite well, from goods exports to Romania, transportation equipment, computers, petroleum, starting with the top 5. And on the other way, for top 5 US goods imports from Romania, which were computers, metal manufacturers, electrical equipment, appliances, machinery. In your time here, what did you see there in that, the business side? You think America, still the number one economy in the world. Why do you think it's not trading more? Where do you think it could trade more? Both directions.
I think the last year was really, for the most part, and for the statistics game, a aberration. I think COVID skewed a lot of numbers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Number two, I'm not sure how those numbers were calculated, because I think the relationship with the United States is much more significant than those numbers indicate. A lot of US companies that deal with Romania may not deal with Romania through their US entity. They may deal with Romania through an offshore entity, for example, in the Antilles. So the Dutch, for example, would show a much higher percentage, which is really untrue, because it's really a US company just happens to be dealing through its offshore subsidiary. It's still a US company. but the statistics would not pick it up that way because of the corporate the domicile of that entity. So I think if you look through that subsidiary issue, the relationship is not at number 10. I think it's probably closer to 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And the issue is, why isn't it number 1? I think because it's in Europe. I think Romania has started to modernize, not just militarily, but has started to modernize across the board. Romania, as you know, was known as the breadbasket of Europe. It is still a leading producer of grain,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have very much processing plants. They export grain, they import bread. Go figure that one out.
Yeah.
So that's one of the issues we were working on. We were also working on modernizing irrigation canals, irrigation technology, which is not most of us, until they really understand modern farming. We think of irrigation as a ditch that you get water out of. It's anything but that. It's a very complicated, highly technological process with drip spraying and fertilizing, and it's all very technologically advanced. So that's one of the areas that we've been working, US companies have been working with Romanian companies to advance that process. We've also been working in developing their manufacturing. Ford, for example, has a very substantial plant in Craiova, where they build and sell a lot of cars. Mostly they're smaller cars. They're mostly for European and non-US markets. But again, that's one of the issues that's going to be addressed. And I think as Romanian manufacturing improves and increases, which is what we've been working on during my tenure here, those numbers are going to change dramatically, because like other things, unfortunately, the communists left havoc behind it. And a lot of these things have to be addressed and modernized and I guess bring them into the 21st, 22nd century. So,
well, you were saying there about how the statistics may be slightly misleading just because American companies operate through other entities in Europe and elsewhere. And I remember in your hearings, you talked about 500 companies that were operating roughly in Romania at that time, a year or so ago. And I guess I'm wondering, how much time does an ambassador spend, let's say, as between, or at least an ambassador from the United States, as between business issues, defense issues, and other issues? Can you give me a feel for that?
I don't know that we have a chart where we try to allocate, but since we're talking about economic issues, one of the great things about Romania, they have a very good American chamber here. The president of the American chamber, a fellow named Ionut Simion, is terrific. The other board members from some of the biggest US companies, including Coca-Cola, including others, are just terrific. They were immensely helpful in helping Romania get through the COVID emergency, especially at the beginning, where they contributed not only cash, but a lot of other in-kind sort of goods, from drinks and food and PPE and other equipment to help the Romanian people. So it's been a pleasure working with them, and Ionuț in particular has done a remarkable job leading that group and helping not just the existing American companies there, but also seeking to attract others to join here. He's the head of PwC in Romania, which is a global accounting firm. And they've done a great job. And one of the projects I was working on with him is expanding the Amcham, putting in other chapters in several other areas of the country. For example, Iași, where Amazon is, there's no Amcham chamber. It makes it difficult. There are other major companies there aside from Amazon. So having a presence there and uniting all of Romania through Amcham, the American companies, would create a great synergy. So that was one of the things we're working on. Yeah. And we spent a lot of time working on that. One of my colleagues at the embassy was our representative to the Amcham, a fellow named Brad Stillwell, who's just terrific and great job. And I think they will continue pursuing these undertakings that we commenced last year, which will inure to the benefit of not just American companies doing business here, but also Romania, and improve the business climate as well. So coming back to the military, obviously that was a substantial time Romania has undertaken on a very substantial program to modernize its military capability. As you know, last year we brought Patriots in, the first HIMARS, which is the acronym for high mobility artillery rocket shells, state-of-the-art surface-to-surface missiles that have a range, I think, about 300 kilometers or so. Very credible military capacity. Romania's purchasing F-16s, helicopters. They've embarked with U.S. assistance on a very substantial and dramatic military modernization. I think they're a very credible defense force, and I think that the defense minister, Ciucă, has been just a tremendous leader in organizing and spearheading the country's efforts in that regard.
On those two, you mentioned a bunch of things that you wanted to push forward and have moved forward significantly. When you look back on your time here, what would you say? I wish I had a little more time to finish this, or a little more time to finish that. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to.
So, in other words, if you were had you stayed longer in your post here, is there any unfinished business that you said, boy, I'd like to see that to be brought further down the line? Was it being
everything's unfinished. I come out of real estate. You buy one building, you want another one. You have two, you want three or four. You got four, you want six.
Right.
So you always want more. But I think we made tremendous progress last year. I think on the economic side, there's always room to do more and to do better. We've made tremendous progress in some regards. On the military side, that's a continuing progress. One of the great achievements in my mind is the signing of a 10-year defense cooperation roadmap at the beginning of October between Romania and the United States, which will basically serve as the roadmap for collaboration going forward. And I think there's always room to do more and to do
Yeah.
better. A lot of these programs have to be implemented, obviously.
Right.
But there were tremendous steps forward.
And now that you're here, in Bucharest, how do you see your post-ambassadorial duties? Why did you stay, I guess, or why do you come back? New York, come back.
I was in the States for a few weeks. I'm back. I'll be back in the States. I'll be going back and forth. I think, as I said before I left, I would like to see a lot of the economic projects and other projects to advance Romania's economy continue to flourish. If I can assist a little bit in that regard, I'm willing to help. Plus, it's a wonderful place and I enjoy being here. The people are just wonderful, and I've enjoyed it quite a lot. So
well, I understand that because I've been here a long time. What's your favorite Romanian food?
Oh, I must say, without picking a food, one of the things that truly impressed me is how cosmopolitan Bucharest and other cities have become, because you can have, as you know, since you live in Bucharest now, and you and I are going to have lunch in the next few days, you can have anything from sushi to Chinese food to Indian food to, so in terms of to a good old American pizza, which I guess the greatest misnomer of all time, American pizza. But
and Reuben sandwiches, you'll be pleased to know.
Exactly. So what's my favorite? Sadly, if I were to stand up and you'd see my waistline, you'd realize that I have a lot of favorites. So
now we'll go to questions in a second, but what advice do you have for the next guy who's going to take your old job? Any particular advice?
Well, you know, I remember telling my first DCM, Abby Rupp, who was here. I don't know if you had the chance to meet Abby or not, who's terrific. And then I told my current DCM, Dave Muniz, who came in the middle of the summer, who's also terrific, do the right thing. And everybody, you have a sense of what the right thing is. Don't let pressure from unwanted pressure keep you from doing what's right. We're faced with a lot of practical issues and problems. We have to look for pragmatic solutions, which are not always the easiest. So my advice to them is try to do the right things and everything will work out well.
Terrific, terrific. Well, I think that's very sound advice, and I think it's pretty much American advice always, you know, do the right thing. And people, as you say, instinctively know what that is. Now, we have Raluca, who's probably watching any questions that may have floated in the course of this hour, because I dragged you from left to right, overwhelming you with questions here. But I found,
you know, if I may interrupt for one
sure.
second, I'll be very quick. One of the things that I'm especially proud of that we were able to put in place is I advocated against the scourge of human trafficking very, very much. They have to put an end to it. And one of the things we did in conjunction with that, and the Romanian government and law enforcement were just terrific in that regard. They really work hard. But one of the things we're able to do is get an agreement between the city of Bucharest and law enforcement and the Orthodox Church to build a shelter for trafficking victims that would have various assistance, medical, spiritual, psychological, whatever the victims would need in terms of assistance, in addition to obviously food and shelter and whatnot, which I think is very important. It's the first one of its kind. The agreement's first one of its kind that was done. And I recently met, before I left, with the Metropolitan in Timișoara, Ioan, and we're going to try to do the same thing up there. He's all in favor of doing that, and he's going to work with the government of Romania to do that. So I think those kinds of things, which don't get spoken about a lot in terms of discussions like this, are important to emphasize, because those help everyday people, and they're crucially important, especially for the people who are most vulnerable and need the most help. So I'm very proud of those things. I'm sorry. Now you can go to your questions.
No, actually, it's very useful, because I asked you what's left on the agenda, everything, but you singled out something you as a private citizen are going to lend your support to. And I think the whole thing about trafficking's been a little bit forgotten. I remember when they talked about trafficking out of the Gare du Nord, and then it sort of fell off to other subjects. So I think it's terrific that you'll be here to keep that high on the agenda, and you've got the Orthodox Church, which is influential, very influential still in Romania. So now let me just see, we have different people listening. Raluca, are you there?
Yes. We do have a few questions, and we have a very little time. The top of the hour is in 3 minutes, so I apologize to everybody whose questions haven't been answered. The first question is from Mr. Aldous Mina. Says, as a former US Senate candidate and former US Peace Corps representative to Romania, and who have served in the federal government, I am curious to know what the ambassador's experience was like in building consensus among executive decision makers in the country. Were they cooperative?
If he's referring to members of the government, I would say there were nothing but cooperative. The people I dealt with were some of the hardest working people that I've ever come across. They would start early in the morning, and I'm not exaggerating. I would speak to various ministers, the Interior, Defense, the prosecutors, the Justice Minister, even the Prime Minister, at all hours of the night, as late as 11 o'clock at night, midnight, depending on what the issues were and what had to be done. Many times they were in government meetings. I think they were terrific. I have nothing but praise for them.
Excellent. Good to hear. I think it's very good to hear. What else, Raluca?
We have another question. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this one, from Mr. Gabriel Bejan. Do you think that the Biden administration will change the American policy towards China?
I think it's too early. I certainly don't know. I think maybe Mark Gittenstein may know better than I do. From my perspective, we'll wait and see. And I must say, I think we're all trying to get to the same place. Which road we take to get there, or what road we all think is best to get there, remains to be seen. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
So do we have one? We have a few seconds left. It's not TV, so we could go on for an hour, but I would never drag you 1 minute further. You've been very generous with your time. How about another one, Lucas? You have something else?
There are a few more. I'm going to ask a quick one, because we could go on forever. Can you ask Mr. Zuckerman what drove him to become a diplomat? Did he always want to do that? Good question.
That's a good question. The answer is no. I saw the opportunity in discussions with various people, and including the president, the US president, President Trump, to have the ability to come to Romania and help not just the United States, but help Romania as well. And I hope I've done a little bit in that regard for both countries.
Well, listen, on that, I think very fair assessment. I think your tenure, you accomplished an enormous amount in a year. And you obviously had I think, a special advantage being from Romania, and perhaps a special respect of Romanians towards an American with those roots. And so I want to thank you, Adrian, for your time. It was super interesting. And I'd like to thank everybody else who watched in. And this will be, Raluca will be seeing this rebroadcast where? Can you give us a quick reminder?
It will be on Alianta's Facebook page, on Alianta's website, Alianta's YouTube channel.
Fantastic. Excellent. And so the document will be public, and we'll see which other pickup we get. Thanks very much, Mr. Ambassador. Adrian, thank you very much. And
John, it's been a pleasure being here with you, and I look forward to our lunch or dinner, and I'll see what your favorite food is.
Okay. All right. Very good. That's a deal. Okay. So long. Thanks a lot, everybody.